Imagine a human with the raw strength to bench press 500 pounds without training, lungs that outperform Olympic athletes, and a brain larger than your own. This isn't science fiction. This was your evolutionary cousin, the Neanderthal. If they walked among us today, we'd likely view them as superhuman, both physically dominant and intellectually formidable. These weren't the dim-witted cavemen of popular culture. They were nature's ultimate experiment in creating the perfect Ice Age survivor. You think you're tough? Good luck going toe-to-toe with someone whose bones were so thick, they'd probably snap your arm if you tried arm wrestling them. The Neanderthals' entire physical makeup was like evolution dialed everything up to 11. From their barrel-chested bodies to their colossal brains, everything about these hominids screamed extreme. And yet, for all their incredible adaptations, they vanished from Earth while we survived. So what exactly made them such absolute powerhouses? And more importantly, why aren't they still around? Let's start with their ridiculous bodies. At first glance, a Neanderthal might actually seem somewhat unimpressive in stature. The average male stood around 5 feet 5 inches, and females about 5 feet 0 inches tall. But height doesn't tell the full story, not even close. These guys were massively thick and heavy for their height. A typical Neanderthal male would have weighed around 165 to 175 pounds, packed into that relatively short frame. That gave them a stocky, powerfully built physique that would make today's bodybuilders jealous. Their skeleton tells the real story, though. Neanderthal bones were insanely robust, much thicker than ours, with enormous joint surfaces and massive ridges where their muscles attached. Their limb bones show they had unbelievable muscle mass, especially in the shoulders and arms. And, get this, studies of their arm bones show asymmetry that's remarkable. Their dominant arm showed substantially more development than their non-dominant arm, far beyond the typical difference we see in modern humans. In comparison, modern humans show only about a 10% difference between arms. This means they were regularly putting their arms through some seriously intense work, probably stuff like thrusting spears into massive Ice Age beasts at close range. If we're talking pure strength, Neanderthals were basically walking tanks. Their bicep and tricep attachment points on their humeri were enormous, suggesting arms that could generate incredible force. While we'll never know exactly how much they could lift, biomechanical analyses suggest they were pound for pound, significantly stronger than even the most powerful modern humans. We're talking about bodies built like Olympic powerlifters, but that came that way naturally. No protein shakes needed. Those massive muscle attachments weren't just for show, either. Neanderthals lived in an environment where being weak meant being dead. Imagine waking up every day knowing you might have to physically battle a woolly rhino just to feed your family. That's the kind of pressure that shaped these incredible bodies. Even their hands were specialized for power, with proportionally shorter thumbs and fingers that were perfect for a crushing, vice-like grip. Bone trauma patterns show they routinely used this grip in their daily activities. If a Neanderthal grabbed you, you weren't getting away easily. But their bodies weren't just built for raw strength. Their chests were absolutely bizarre compared to ours. Their rib cage had a bell-shaped structure, wider at the bottom than modern humans. Recent studies have shown that Neanderthals had approximately 20% greater lung capacity than modern humans of the same body size and sex. The Kabara II male, one of the best-preserved Neanderthal specimens, showed a ribcage structure suggesting significantly enhanced breathing capacity compared to modern humans, potentially way beyond what you'd find in even elite human athletes today. That expanded lung capacity wasn't just for show. It helped fuel their high metabolism, which they needed to maintain those massive muscles and big brains in frigid Ice Age environments. Unlike modern humans who breathe using both diaphragm and ribcage expansion, Neanderthals relied more heavily on their beefy diaphragms. Their unique chest shape gave them the ability to take incredibly deep breaths, perfect for fueling intense bursts of activity, like ambush hunting woolly rhinos and mammoths. What's fascinating is that these differences weren't just evident in adults, they were present from birth. Studies of Neanderthal infant skeletons show they already had the distinctive deep, short rib cage. This wasn't an adaptation that developed during life, it was genetically hardwired. Neanderthal babies were literally born ready to survive in an Ice Age world, with bodies pre-adapted for the harsh environment that awaited them. Speaking of hunting, these guys had a hunting strategy that makes our ancestors look like complete wimps. While modern humans developed ranged weapons to kill from a distance, Neanderthals hunted up close and personal, like terrifyingly close. They used heavy thrusting spears to take down enormous prey, which meant they had to get right up in the face of animals that could easily trample or gore them to death. And we have the evidence to prove it. Neanderthal skeletons show injury patterns with similarities to those seen in dangerous modern activities like rodeo riding. Many Neanderthal fossils show signs of head and neck trauma, suggesting frequent physical confrontations with large animals. Imagine a hunting strategy so brutal that getting wounded was basically part of the job. They literally wrestled with massive prey, using their immense upper body strength to drive spears into animals at point-blank range. It's no wonder their bodies evolved to be so incredibly robust. Anything less would have been crushed. The specific pattern of injuries tells us a lot about how they hunted. Injuries concentrated on the head, neck, and upper body suggest they were frequently being struck or thrown by large animals. As anthropologists have noted, given the tendency of ungulates to react strongly to being impaled, these injury patterns make perfect sense. Imagine driving a spear into a 2-ton woolly rhino and trying to hold on while it thrashes around in pain and rage. That's what Neanderthals did routinely. Neanderthal hunting was also a team effort. Archaeological evidence shows they could coordinate to take down multiple animals at once. This wasn't just brute force. It required planning, communication, and coordination. They likely used the landscape to their advantage, driving animals into bogs or natural traps where they'd be vulnerable. Each member of the hunting party would have had their role, working together to bring down prey many times their size. These weren't solitary brutes. They were team players whose lives depended on collaboration. In fact, we know Neanderthals were social creatures who cared for their injured and sick. The famous old man of La Chapelle-aux-Saints had severe arthritis and had lost most of his teeth, yet he survived to what was considered old age for Neanderthals, probably his 40s. Someone must have helped prepare his food and care for him when he couldn't hunt. Multiple other specimens show evidence of injuries that would have required extended care from group members to survive. That's not just cooperation, that's compassion. Their toolkit was surprisingly sophisticated too. The Mousterian tools associated with Neanderthals might look primitive at first glance, but they required considerable skill to create. Neanderthals were masters of the levallois technique, a complex method of preparing a stone core to produce perfectly shaped flakes. They crafted everything from heavy-duty chopping tools to delicate scrapers for processing hides. And they didn't just use stone. They crafted wooden spears perfectly balanced for thrusting, and even developed synthetic adhesives for hafting stone points onto wooden handles. These weren't crude clubs, but carefully engineered hunting implements designed for their specific hunting strategy. Now, let's talk about their brains, because this is where things get really interesting. Pop culture loves to portray Neanderthals as dumb brutes, but nothing could be further from the truth. Their brains were actually larger than ours. Male Neanderthals averaged around 1,640 cubic centimeters of brain volume, compared to our 1,350 to 1,400. That's roughly 20% more brain, or about a quarter cup of extra neural matter stuffed inside their skulls. But size isn't everything. Their brains were organized differently than ours. Neanderthals had elongated skulls with a distinctive occipital bun, a bulge at the back of the head where visual processing centers were located. Those massive eye sockets they had weren't just for show. They likely had bigger eyes and visual cortices than we do, probably an adaptation for better vision in the dim, high-latitude environments they called home. All that extra visual processing power came at a cost, though. While they had more brain overall, a greater proportion was dedicated to vision and controlling their powerful bodies. This potentially left them with less neural capacity for social cognition and the kind of abstract thinking that lets modern humans create sprawling social networks. But make no mistake, these weren't stupid creatures by any stretch. They made complex tools, controlled fire, created art, and possibly had language similar to our own. Speaking of language, the evidence suggests Neanderthals could talk. They had a thyroid bone, which supports the tongue, virtually identical to ours. They also possessed a version of the FOXP2 gene, which is strongly associated with language capabilities in humans. Communication would have been essential for coordinating those dangerous group hunts and passing down tool-making techniques. A discovery that really challenges our understanding is evidence suggesting Neanderthals may have created cave art. Paintings dated to more than 64,000 years ago in Spanish caves, before modern humans arrived in Europe, strongly indicate Neanderthals could have been the artists. While some researchers remain cautious about this interpretation, the dating evidence is compelling. They also wore jewelry and collected items like eagle talons to make into necklaces. They even invented the first synthetic glue by heating birch bark, a complex process requiring careful temperature control. These aren't the behaviors of mindless brutes. We've also discovered evidence of string made by Neanderthals, a piece of twisted fiber dated to between 41,000 and 52,000 years ago. This might not sound impressive until you realize the technical sophistication needed to harvest plant fibers at just the right time, process them correctly, and twist them into a usable cord. Even more mind-blowing is the discovery at Bruniquel Cave in France, where Neanderthals built elaborate circular structures from broken stalagmites about 176,000 years ago. These structures were found 300 meters from the cave entrance, meaning Neanderthals ventured deep into complete darkness with torches to create them. The truly wild thing is that for hundreds of thousands of years, Neanderthals were the undisputed masters of Ice Age Europe. They thrived in conditions that would kill most modern humans without serious technological help. Their bodies were specialized cold weather machines. Those wide, barrel-shaped torsos minimized heat loss, while their shorter limbs, compared to body size, reduced surface area where heat could escape. Even their large noses might have been adaptations to warm and humidify freezing air before it hit their lungs. Their mastery of fire goes back at least 200,000 years, allowing them to survive in frigid environments. They didn't just maintain fires, they engineered them, creating multiple hearths in their shelters and using fire for cooking, warmth, light, protection, and manufacturing. Archaeological evidence from the Moldova site in Ukraine even shows they built a massive dwelling from mammoth bones, complete with multiple hearths inside. This wasn't just huddling in a cave. This was engineering a solution to Ice Age survival. Neanderthals also developed strategies for dealing with seasonal changes in food availability. Evidence suggests they understood migration patterns of animals and planned accordingly. At some sites, we find remains showing they were timing their hunts to coincide with annual reindeer migrations. At others, we see evidence they were exploiting different resources in different seasons, focusing on large mammals during some parts of the year and gathering more plant foods during others. This kind of long-term planning requires understanding cyclic patterns in nature and organizing group activities around predicted future events, clear evidence of sophisticated thinking. So here's the big question. If Neanderthals were such physical specimens with huge brains, why aren't they still around? This is where the story gets complicated. For much of history, scientists assumed that when our ancestors migrated into Europe, we simply outcompeted or possibly even killed off the Neanderthals. But recent genetic discoveries have completely changed this narrative. In 2010, scientists at the Max Planck Institute successfully sequenced the Neanderthal genome and made a bombshell discovery: humans and Neanderthals interbred. If you have European or Asian ancestry, roughly 1 to 4% of your DNA comes from Neanderthals. Instead of simply replacing them, we actually absorbed them into our gene pool. The Neanderthals didn't completely disappear. Part of them lives on in billions of people today. This interbreeding wasn't a one-time event either. Genetic evidence shows multiple episodes of interbreeding between Neanderthals and modern humans. One particularly amazing discovery was Denny, a 90,000-year-old individual from Denisova Cave, who was the daughter of a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father, another archaic human species. This shows that these different human groups met and mated multiple times across thousands of years. But interbreeding doesn't fully explain their disappearance. Around 40,000 years ago, as modern humans spread into Europe, Neanderthal populations were already struggling. They maintained small population sizes throughout their existence, probably never exceeding 15,000 individuals across their entire range. This low genetic diversity made them vulnerable to disease and environmental changes. Inbreeding was common. We've found evidence of Neanderthals, whose parents were likely half-siblings. Then the climate started to shift dramatically. Around the time modern humans entered Europe, several extreme cold events hit, drastically altering environments that Neanderthals had adapted to. One particularly devastating event might have been the Campanian Ignimbrite eruption around 39,000 years ago. This massive volcanic explosion in what's now Italy spread ash across much of Eastern Europe and likely caused a volcanic winter, a sudden cooling that would have devastated plant and animal life across the region. Our ancestors had some advantages despite being physically weaker. Modern humans developed more diverse tools, including projectile weapons, that allowed hunting at a safer distance. We also formed larger social networks, trading resources across vast distances during tough times. And our more flexible diet included small game and fish. When times got tough, our adaptability may have given us the edge, even though Neanderthals were physically superior in many ways. New evidence shows some Neanderthal groups did exploit marine resources, collecting shellfish and even hunting seals and dolphins. But this versatility wasn't universal among all Neanderthal populations. Many relied heavily on large game hunting, a strategy that became increasingly risky as climate fluctuations made big prey animals scarcer. It's also possible that disease played a role in their extinction. As modern humans entered Europe from Africa, they may have carried pathogens that Neanderthals had no immunity against. By around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthal numbers had dwindled significantly. Some populations may have held out in isolated pockets like Gibraltar until about 37,000 years ago, but eventually they vanished completely as a distinct species. Their legacy, however, lives on in our DNA. What's fascinating is that some Neanderthal genes appear to have provided benefits to our ancestors and potentially continue to influence modern humans today. Research suggests certain Neanderthal-derived genetic variants affect our immune systems. Other genes may influence skin and hair characteristics that could have helped our ancestors adapt to non-African environments. Research into Neanderthal genetic contributions to modern human traits is ongoing, with scientists investigating potential connections to various biological functions in contemporary populations. The extinction of Neanderthals wasn't the story of advanced humans replacing primitive cavemen. It was the complex tale of two very closely related human species, each with their own unique adaptations, competing and sometimes mating in a harsh Ice Age world. Neanderthals weren't evolutionary failures. They successfully inhabited Europe for over 300,000 years in some of the most challenging conditions imaginable. That's longer than our species has existed. Their adaptations were perfectly suited to their lifestyle and environment, even if they ultimately proved less flexible than ours when conditions changed rapidly. In some ways, Neanderthals weren't just our cousins, they were our teachers. Evidence suggests that when modern humans entered Neanderthal territory, we sometimes adopted their technologies and survival strategies. The Châtel-Perronian tool industry, for instance, shows features of both Neanderthal and modern human methods, suggesting cultural exchange between the groups. Honestly, it's wild to think these incredible specimens once walked the earth. A human so powerful they could probably snap you like a twig, with lungs bigger than any Olympic athlete and a brain larger than yours, yet still capable of creating art and complex tools. If that doesn't qualify as an absolute freak of nature, I don't know what does. The next time someone uses Neanderthal as an insult, remember they're actually referring to one of the most physically impressive human species to ever exist. One that could have bench pressed you while solving puzzles with their bigger brain before heading out to wrestle a woolly rhino for dinner. So yeah, the real cavemen were way cooler than the cartoons led you to believe. We may have outlasted them, but in many ways, Neanderthals were the ultimate prehistoric badasses, absolute freaks of nature who pushed the boundaries of what a human body could be, and a little piece of their superhuman legacy continues in many of us today.